All right, in this video, we're going to talk very briefly here about archaic warfare. So, when we talked about the Minoan civilization, we said there's not a ton of evidence for their warfare. It's not a big theme in their society. And then with the Mycenaeans and the people of the early Iron Age, we saw that warfare is a more prominent part of their life. There are examples of the kind of armor and weapons they use. And we know that they're engaging in some raids and attacks, although we don't know a lot about the specifics of like their formations or anything like that, and we certainly don't know about any specific battles that are happening. This will start to shift in the Archaic period until we're getting sort of full-blown wars and battles by the end of this period. So first off, I want to note that the Greeks do not have professional armies. So instead, they rely on what are called citizen armies. So what do I mean by that? Well, each polis has its citizens, right? Usually it's just considered the men, the free adult men who live in the territory of the polis. And those citizens are required to show up for military service when called upon by the government, okay? They are not trained, usually. There are some exceptions. They are not provided any kind of equipment, so they have to bring their own, which can be difficult because armor is really expensive when it's made out of things like bronze and iron. That can be really expensive. So often if you're on the poorer end, these things are coming down over generations. They might be kind of patched together, kind of sets of armor. There may be some restrictions. So they're not provided any training, they're not provided any weapons, but they are required to show up and to fight when asked to. So, the basic soldier in this period is the hoplite soldier. And there is a set of armor and weapons we associate with the hoplite. So, in terms of armor, he wears a helmet. Right? He wears a breastplate. And he may wear greaves. So the helmet, of course, covers his head. There are different styles, but often pieces come down to cover the cheeks and the nose. The breastplate covers the shoulders. It goes over the shoulders, and then it covers the front and the back, the chest and the back down to the waist. It does not go over the arms. And then the greaves cover the shins. So there's no coverage of the arms. There's no coverage of like the groin area and the upper legs. And you may imagine that's a pretty vital area to not cover, but that is probably a sacrifice for movement. Often what you see instead are these kind of little leather straps attached like a skirt all the way around the bottom of the breastplate. And those manage to provide some coverage to the region while also not inhibiting their movement too much. Okay, so that's what you wear to protect yourself. What you carry as a weapon, well, you carry first of all a shield, I should say. The shield is round. It's a big round shield. If you look on the inside, it's got straps on either end, so you can slide your left arm through it and hold onto it really tightly. It's not going to like flop around. Then you have a spear, a long spear. That's actually your main weapon. The ancient Greeks, they do sword fight. But when you're in a battle formation, you're really focusing on the use of the spear. So you do have a sword, but it's at your side. You hope you're not going to have to pull it out, because that means things have gone very poorly for you and your people. Okay, so the hoplites, in order to fight, they don't just all run out with their shields and their big spears. They have a formation. They create lines. And in these lines, they hold their shields on their left hand, and they stand so that their shield, the left end, will go out a little bit beyond you and cover the person to your left, and this part, like the right side of you, is covered by the person to your right, so these shields kind of overlap a bit. And then you hold your spear here, kind of where the shields meet. You can kind of rest it. And so you create this line of hopefully tightly packed shields and spears that will be difficult to break up. They tend to go about 8 rows deep, so you form this line kind of however long you need, and then you do 8 more behind it to create a nice, really compact rectangle that hopefully is not going to get broken up. And so long as you stay in this nice tight formation, it is difficult to break you up, it's difficult to injure you, and you can sort of just roll on over your enemies. So yeah, this is called the phalanx formation, and the Greeks use it very successfully for a very long time. That's not to say it is not without its drawbacks. For one, your sides are pretty open because there's no shields there. I mean, you can make a formation that has it, but in general, the sides are open and the back is open. There's no protection there. So if someone gets around you, that can be the end for you, because also the phalanx can move forward. It's so difficult to turn it to face a different direction. So it can't easily adjust from moving forward. Another issue you might have is if the terrain's really uneven, then it's more likely that the phalanx will get broken up. And if the phalanx loosens up a bit, there are places for others to enter, it can easily be destroyed. So that's an issue, especially Greece is really rocky. They don't have a lot of nice flat terrain. So it's not unlikely that you will encounter that kind of issue. Okay. So it's not infallible. And the other thing is you're mostly fighting other phalanxes. So it's really just these two groups crashing against each other, right? And seeing who can make the other one give way, break up the other one. So how do you break up the other phalanx? Well, you have some supporting people. You will have a small number of slingers and archers, essentially what we call light infantry. They're throwing things or shooting things, and their job is to hopefully harass the other phalanx and maybe break it up. If you can knock down a few men, the lines get disrupted. There is also a small squadron of cavalry. Those are men mounted on horses, but horses are very expensive in the ancient Greek world since there's not a lot of farmland to raise them, and so only the wealthiest men have a horse. And so cavalry does not play a large role for a very long time in Greek warfare. Their job is often to protect the sides so that no one can get around there. So the bulk, the core of the Greek army, though, the vast majority of soldiers, are these hoplite soldiers who form the phalanxes and fight in that way. Now, like I said, you have to provide your own gear, and it's expensive, so that can actually restrict membership. Very, very poor people don't have gear and can't afford it. And so the people who make up these hoplite soldiers tend to be the hoi mezoi, right? We said this middle class. They tend to have enough money that they can afford the gear to serve as a hoplite. But if they were even richer, they would probably get a horse and join the cavalry because it's safer there. So they're in that middle position. The very poor, the hoi kakoi, they have to serve in supporting roles. They're the slingers and the archers. They generally don't need heavy armor because their job is to just harass and run away, not to be attacked. And a sling is almost nothing to create. You can make that out of some bits of leather and gut and stones that you find. So it's incredibly cheap to build. Since the hoi mezoi make up the bulk of the phalanx, the hoi mezoi, it gives them a certain amount of power within the city. So they're largely excluded, we said, in the political structure from magistracies and the boule. But since the state needs them in order to go to war and to defend itself, they have to concede something to them, right? They can't just ignore them entirely. And so the hoi mezoi in this way become kind of an important force in a city. And in fact, if the hoi mezoi are a bit more conservative and supportive of the aristocracy, it's less likely you're going to have a lot of tension. If they're a bit more revolutionary and want to see change, then that tension is more likely to kind of boil over into revolution and change, as we will see. So at this point, the kind of warfare that we see continues to be raiding to a degree, but there's now land disputes. So since we have made this transition from livestock rearing to farmland, the nature of warfare is also going to change, because back when it was livestock rearing, raids made a lot of sense. You can go to your neighbor, you can steal goats and come home. They're movable. It's a lot harder to go to your neighbor's field and steal all their wheat and come home, right? So instead, what they're doing is these polis are fighting over land, and especially who can claim land, especially since land is so scarce, and we talked about that issue of land hunger, that polis want to increase the amount of good farmland that is available to them. So they will fight over ownership of good plains. And one of the earliest such disputes that we know of is two cities on Euboea, Chalkis and Eretria, had a war over what's called the Lelantine Plain. It's recorded in early Greek historians as one of the first big kind of Greek versus Greek battles. And they drew in neighbors as well, allies to support them, and it was a kind of a long happening affair. It had happened over many years. That being said, when it comes to actual battles, they tend to be pretty brief. These do not go on for days and days. The phalanxes meet. The issue is decided within a few hours. Mortality is I'm going to say not so bad for ancient warfare. The mortality rate is probably about 15%, so 15% of men who go out to the battle will probably die, which is not great, not the worst imaginable either. It's also fairly comparable to the maternal mortality rate, which is why in the Medea, the character of Medea famously sort of says, I'd rather go to war than to give birth, because, I mean, they're both terrible, and that's kind of warfare and childbirth are what kill off young men and young women who have reached adulthood in the ancient Greek world. So that is essentially the nature of warfare in the period, and it'll change a bit over time, and really especially once we get to the later classical and finally the Hellenistic period, it begins to change more and more fundamentally. All right, so that's it for this. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.